Welcome to Season 3 of the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. This is episode 127 with Lana Lagomarsini.
Basically, what I would love to see in my industry is, as much as I enjoy like the piratey chef culture, I would love to see that kind of take a back seat to a more inclusive culture with chefs. I would love to see more women of color in fine dining kitchens. I would like to see more women of color in executive positions in fine dining kitchens. I would like to see people getting paid a living wage so that restaurants can continue. And as far as where I'm going, I just want to be able to tell the stories of people that we may not even know about, like, Hercules Posey, who was George Washington's cook, an enslaved man who actually ran away on his birthday and came here to New York.
This is the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast with your host, Chris Spear. Each week, I'll be speaking with food entrepreneurs and people in the culinary industry. If you're interested in learning more about our organization dedicated to helping people build and grow their food businesses, look us up on the web at chefswithoutrestaurants.com and .org, and on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Chefs Without Restaurants. Now, enjoy the show. Welcome to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. I'm your host, Chris Spear. On the show, I have conversations with culinary entrepreneurs and people in the food and beverage industry who took a different route. They're caterers, research chefs, personal chefs, cookbook authors, food truckers, farmers, cottage bakers, and all sorts of culinary renegades. I myself fall into the personal chef category, as I started my own personal chef business, Perfect Little Bites, 11 years ago. And while I started working in kitchens in the early 90s, I've literally never worked in a restaurant. Welcome to Season 3 of the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. Did you miss me? I'm really looking forward to getting this season going. I've spent the past month recording some really great conversations, and I can't wait to share them with you. This week, we're joined by Lana Lagomarsini. She's the chef and owner of Lana Cooks, a personal chef business based in New York City. Lana comes from a fine dining background, having cooked at Blue Hill at Stone Barns, Gramercy Tavern, Danielle, and Momofuku Ko. Like many chefs, when restaurants began shutting down due to COVID, Lana explored the personal chef sector. On the show, we discuss her restaurant background and her transition into the personal chef business. We talk about kitchen culture, finding her culinary voice, and the future she'd like to see in the food industry. Lana also talks about cooking for her community, her involvement in the Black food movement, and how African American cuisines and the slave trade impacted American cuisine. During the episode, you'll hear her talk about an upcoming event that she's going to be doing in a couple days. I had planned to drop links in the show notes for you to buy tickets, but I'm very happy to announce that she's actually sold out the event. I hope you enjoy our conversation. As always, I'd love feedback. Jump into social media, connect with us, maybe give Lana a follow. The easiest way to connect with me is on Instagram at Chefs Without Restaurants, or you can send me an email to chefswithoutrestaurants@gmail.com. And now I'm pleased to welcome our newest sponsor, Baking Steel. Looking to make better pizza? How about bagels, bread, or English muffins? Then you need a Baking Steel. Don't just take my word for it. Kenji Lopez-Alt of Serious Eats and the Food Lab said, "This is the answer I've been waiting for to produce consistently awesome pizza over and over." I've had my baking steel for a number of years, and I absolutely love it. Besides baking bread goods in the oven, it's the best way for me to make tortillas at home, both corn and flour, as well as an amazing smash burger. And if you want to hear the whole baking steel story, I have founder Andres Lagsden as a guest this season, so that episode should be dropping in a couple weeks. In the meantime, I'm going to drop a link in the show notes so you'll be able to pick up your own baking steel. Hey Lana, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
I've admired the food that you're posting on Instagram, so I've wanted to talk to you, and I think you have a really interesting story, so I can't wait to have you share it with our listeners.
Absolutely. Thank you for the compliment. I work really hard, so it's nice. We appreciate it.
Well, I know there's a lot of serious stuff you want to talk about, so I'm going to jump right in with it. If you had to describe yourself as a flavor, what would it be?
Human, without a doubt. It's that flavor that no one can put their finger on if they don't know it exactly, but it really elevates, I can add something, I think, to everything. And I think that's kind of me, like the dark horse of the spice cabinet. But you definitely, if you know what's good, you have it on hand, you know?
And also, I mean, this goes for all spices, but like fresh cumin. Like either you buy really amazing quality, ground from a company like Spiceology, or you toast and grind your own. It's so transformative, like compared to just like crappy dollar store cumin, right? Well, I usually start with your culinary backstory. So I'd love to hear about kind of like your upbringing as it relates to food. Did you always love food when you were a kid and growing up? And then how did you break into the food industry?
It's funny you asked that because I didn't become a chef until my 20s, but now looking back on my life and my childhood, it's like all the signs were there. Why, it's almost like I was fighting the inevitable in my life. When I look back at my childhood, some of my earliest memories are of food. I grew up in New York City. I was born at the at New York Hospital, and my parents are both from New York City themselves. My mom originally from Alabama. My dad was born in Queens. And they brought me up in New York City. I grew up here until I was about 16. And my mom and I used to, when I was like 6 or 7 years old, one of my earliest memories is we used to go to my grandmother's house on the Upper West Side. And then we used to go to this one Italian joint, like right around the corner, and get mussels. Like that was our dish together. Like we'd always get like a big bowl of mussels. And like what 6-year-old is like slurping down mussels, like, but me, I used to love to eat broccoli and stuff, which is now actually a part of my logo. My parents used to sing a broccoli song to me when I was growing up.
I didn't know there was any broccoli songs.
Oh no, they made it up.
Oh,
Don't
they
worry.
made it up. They made up the broccoli song. Okay.
They did. They made up a broccoli song just for me and to get me to, I guess, to eat it. But I also apparently, once I started eating it, loved it. So, I was always liking interesting foods from a young age. I was exposed to good, my parents didn't, they weren't really like chicken finger parents, what I refer to as like, parents who kind of, want their children to eat. So they'll like feed them more plain versions of food. They, as far as food was concerned, they definitely brought me into their level of eating quite from a young age, and something I really appreciate.
I think that's great. I mean, I have kids and it's a mixed bag. Broccoli, actually, they love. I don't know. I don't want to say my kids are going to be vegetarians, but they gravitate more towards the vegetables than the meat. Like last night, they didn't want to eat the meatloaf, but we ate all the broccoli. Like they went for like 3 helpings of broccoli, which is amazing.
They're going to have great iron in their blood.
Yes. So I know you ultimately went to culinary school, but you actually went to school for journalism first. Is that right?
Yeah. So I was very interested in photography actually all through high school. I worked at the International Center of Photography. I always had a camera in my hand, and I did want to go to art school, but my parents like suggested against it, if you will, and nudged me away from art school. They were really worried about me entering the art field. I was at the time a very sensitive child, and my dad was in advertising for a hot minute way back when, and he was like, "It's a tough field. I don't want to be your whole life." So my mom said, "Well, you're very good at writing. Why don't you think about doing something like photojournalism? Why don't you go to journalism school?" So I did, and I went to Northeastern in Boston, and I had a fantastic time there. I learned a great deal about journalism. I learned a great deal about myself. But during that time was actually when I started to realize how much I loved cooking as well.
So how did you break into the food industry? Like, what was your first job in food, and how did you get into it?
So I've always had jobs in food. I actually joke I've had one office job, and I quit on the same day that I was fired. So it was one of those days where I walked in and I said, "I can't do this anymore." And they were like, "Thank God we were going to fire you today." So I've always had a job in the industry. I started out as a waitress when I was 15 years old. And so that was kind of a way for me to make money as in high school, a good way for me to, be autonomous. I had a car and I had a job. So there really wasn't much you could tell 17-year-old Lana that she did not know. But when I went to college, I stayed in the industry to make money, as you do in college. I was a bartender and a server and a shop girl and a bouncer for a minute. And, so I kind of stayed in that realm for the majority of my life. So when I broke into actually going into back of house, it was more because I had started to really be in the culture and see what was going on. I realized how much I love food. And once you realize how much you love food and you really like to learn, all of a sudden you start to really like chefs. And once you really start to like chefs, then you start to read a lot more. And then you start to really try to understand their ideas. And before you know it, like I'm, certified foodie, like watching Top Chef all the time and having my friends over for dinner. And then like my senior year, I took a blogging class, like as a elective. And the teacher said, you can write about anything you want, as long as it's something that you can write about 3 times a week, and you can create content for it. And I said, well, I love to cook, So I started a food blog, and I was cooking so much on it and writing so much on it. One of my friends who I had worked previously with was a chef at a different restaurant. And he called me up one day and he said, hey, so you've been writing a lot about food here. He's like, well, one of our line cooks just walked out. He's like, you want to put your money where your mouth is?
And that was it, huh?
And that was kind of it. Yeah. I said, sure. I said, I don't have knives. He said, don't worry, just bring yourself. We'll teach you everything. That was my first kitchen job at a small restaurant in Brookline, which is no more, unfortunately, but it was named the Regal Beagle. And then shortly after that, I picked up a second job at the same time at a barbecue place in Boston called Sweet Cheeks. And
Is that Tiffany? Is that her restaurant?
It's Tiffany Faison's restaurant. Yeah. And through working with Tiffany and her exec chef, Dan, it just they were very supportive of my thirst for wanting to know more. And it was one day I was watching my exec and one of his sous talking about consomme. And they were like describing it so offhandedly, but I had no idea what they were talking about. And I asked him, and I was like, what are you talking about? Like, how do you make consomme? And he's like, oh, it's classic culinary school. Like, you don't really do it anymore, but it's something you would learn if you went. And I was like, I want to go. So he helped me, figure out which school to go to between him and my mom. I wanted to go abroad at first, and then my mom called me up and was like, CIA is like 40 minutes away from the house, right? At this point, they live in the Hudson Valley. And so I ended up moving home. My exec chef was an alumnus of CIA, so he helped write my admissions letter. And after that, CIA accepted me within a few weeks and gave me a full ride, and it was a wrap.
And then you ultimately ended up working at some of the best restaurants. I mean, I think these are places that everyone would know. Blue Hill at Stone Barns, Gramercy Tavern, Momofuku Ko, Danielle. I mean, those are some serious places. What was it about fine dining? Because you could go anywhere in the food industry, but it sounds like you really gravitated towards like these really fine dining, kind of best of the best places.
Yeah, it kind of started because I had known who Dan Barber was. I had done my research. I was wholeheartely obsessed with most chefs by the time I entered culinary school. I'd already read Kitchen Confidential. I was ready, but I was older, as far as the kitchen is concerned. I was 24 when I entered school. So I felt like I was under the gun a little bit, that I should try to work at the best places I could to get as much knowledge as I could obtain and try and catch up with my 18-year-old peers. So that kind of sparked it. But what really was the break that I needed was when I moved home to my parents' home in Beacon in preparation to go to culinary school. And I realized very quickly that I would need a job. I had bills from college. So I went on Craigslist, I'm pretty sure, and Blue Hill at Stone Barns just happened to have had put a posting up. And I said, no, this can't be the same place. So I sent my resume in, and they called me the next day and had me come down for an interview that day. And I got hired on the spot to start working for their events front of house team. And that's kind of how I got my in at Blue Hill. The man who was running events kind of saw something in me and kind of took me under his wing. And then I started bartending. I went down to the restaurant. I went in the kitchen. I went in the bakery. I went in pastry. I went on the farm. Like before I knew it, it had been 4 years. I worked at Blue Hill through my entire time at culinary school, and also time on top of that. So that was a very intense moment of my life because I was going to school, from 7 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon, and then rushing down to Blue Hill to go to work. And I was getting a lot of information at once. I was going to CIA and I was going to Blue Hill University. So I learned a lot in a very short period of time. And I feel like that really helped propel my career. And then, of course, having Blue Hill on my resume didn't hurt after that. As long as I maintained that thirst, it was very easy for me to keep the ball rolling with whatever whatever fine dining restaurant I wanted to move to next.
Looking at all those places, what are some of the similarities in the way they operate? Because they're, again, at a totally different level than a lot of places. Did you notice similarities in the way the kitchen was organized, structured, philosophies?
It's funny because they all differ a bit, but there's always certain things that are always king in the kitchen, like the cleanliness standard and how the culture is different and all it the culture at Blue Hill is very different than the culture at Danielle, very different than the culture at Co. But all of those cooks are kind of coming from they're all cut from the same cloth, they're just chefs that are looking to better themselves, to push themselves, to cook at their highest level. That's definitely what I was doing there. I wanted to see how good can I get, how far can I push it.
Now, have you found the culture to always be good? Because there's a lot of talk, especially these days, about kitchen culture. And that usually is the precursor to how bad kitchen culture is, whether that be sexist or, limiting of people who are not white men. So what have you seen kind of in some of those places?
I mean, yeah, the culture, it has its ups and its downs, for sure. There's the beauty of the camaraderie of the kitchen. But, I've also seen some very negative things happen in fine dining kitchens. Some things directed at me. I often would tell people when I would meet people at random in the city and they said, "Oh, you're a chef. That's so cool." I'd say, yeah, it's awesome, but it's definitely not for the faint of heart. That sensitive girl that my parents were worried about going into art school, does not exist anymore. I definitely have been toughened up a lot by the kitchen, which I'm grateful for because now as an adult, not much bothers me. I can roll with a lot of punches. I mean, I absolutely have had my fair share of things happen, from sous chefs inappropriately grabbing me to being accused of theft because of my race to lots of different fun things like that. Yeah, I've definitely seen a lot. And as being a Black woman, I'm a woman of mixed descent. I'm Black and Latina. I'm German and Italian as well. But I've definitely seen, if I even see people that look like me in the kitchen, we're few and far in between. To see women that look like me in the kitchen are even more rare. So there is that culture, like I said, and especially when you go into fine dining, it is I feel like something people don't talk a lot about is the upfront costs and being a chef. It's a career that notoriously doesn't make a lot of money, but actually costs quite a bit if you think about it. Our equipment is expensive. Our knives are expensive. Most chefs can't afford to live on their own. Most chefs don't see any portion of tips. But we're the reason why people come to restaurants. You go mostly for the food. Of course, people go to restaurants for the atmosphere. That's what keeps people coming back is the hospitality. But if you hear the food is shit, you're probably not going to go to the restaurant just because the people are nice. In the culture of fine dining restaurants, it's really you don't get praised for doing good work. You only get in trouble if you do bad work. It's kind of no news is good news kind of thing. Once in a while, you'll get chefs saying something nice, but that's wow.
I hope that's changing.
Look, old habits die hard. And it's a culture that, perpetuates the boy club kind of atmosphere. And, I feel like it'll die a very slow death event. But it's kind of sad because my industry also is such a beautiful industry, but I see that it's suffering right now because of not necessarily the culture of the aspect, but the culture of chefs not getting paid too much and living these really difficult lives. I struggled for a really long time. My first apartment in New York City, there's no way I would have gotten it if my parents couldn't help me out. And to be in your almost 30, asking your parents for help is like not, and you're still working 90 hours a week. Like you don't even have time to do your laundry and you still need help. Like that's like so like it's almost demeaning. I just wish that, we're so cool. Everyone thinks chefs are so cool, but they don't think we're cool enough to pay us.
Definitely. And, now with the cost of goods going up and the cost of everything going up, there's a lot of conversation about what that's going to do to the industry. But these are costs that need to be absorbed by someone somewhere. And it's just like the market finally catching up.
Yeah. And like, I don't necessarily have a solution to the problem, but I can tell you that, something's got to give. That's why I feel like so many restaurants in New York City are hurting right now. They're looking for people. They're always looking for people. And I've been a private chef for the past 2 years because of the pandemic, but I feel like restaurant life was taken from me. So it's something that I obviously still wax poetic about going back into. And every time I look for a job, even if it's like a perfect, situation, like at the end of the day, like not one of them has been able to offer me an actual cost of living salary.
So you started a personal chef business. I'd love to go down that avenue for a little bit. How did you come up with that? I mean, this is Chefs Without Restaurants, right?
Yeah.
So how did you start that? And when timeline, COVID happened, when did you start this business?
Yeah, so I had been kind of like dipping my toes into it. Like in the year prior to COVID, I had kind of gotten hooked up with an agency and was doing like a meal prep or two a week, just to kind of make ends meet again because I wasn't making enough. And I was at a restaurant that I loved. I was working at Charlie Bird, and I loved working there. Like the crew was great, the food was great, it was fun. It was finally like I felt like finally a restaurant that I want to be at for a very, very long time. Like I was there for 6 months. I was on track to be a sous chef there. And then COVID happened and everyone got laid off. And that hurt because that was the, like I said, one of the, probably the most comfortable I've ever felt in a restaurant setting. And so to have that just like totally taken like very suddenly was a little jarring, but I went, everything in New York around that time was very up in the air. Things were very uncertain. And, I at least took solace in the fact that like everyone got laid off the same day. Everyone in my industry was pretty much laid off within a week.
That doesn't make it any easier though.
It doesn't make it any easier, but again, like a lot of kitchen culture is about the camaraderie, so we were all in it together. Me and all my chef friends that I met at different restaurants over the course of, how many years working in New York City fine dining, like we were all like, wait, this is all happening, so it was at least we were in it together. But, things got pretty dicey. I moved home for a little bit, tried to figure it out, but I wanted to cook, I wanted to cook. So, and I can't ever see myself doing anything other than cooking. Cooking is one of like the few things that quiets my very busy mind. So because of that, I'm forever grateful for something like that. So I knew I had to find a way to still kind of morph it into my life. And it kind of just fell into my lap that there was a family that needed a private chef. And I started working with the agency a little bit more. And before I knew it, it kind of snowballed. A few months later, I just through the luck of the draw of meeting people and networking, I was asked to go out to Arizona to do a retreat and to be a chef out there. And it was during that, it was like a women's retreat and it was very small. So I ended up talking to most of my clients like after dinner. And a lot of them were really pushing for me. It was all Black women and they were all business owners. And they were like, you need to join us. Really kind of was like the final push that I needed because I incorporated on my birthday that like a couple months later as a birthday gift to myself. And it was just kind of the way that I see it. It was like, I want to own my own restaurant someday. I'm going to need to learn how to run a business from, whether or not it's a brick and mortar or it's just me. So I might as well start now.
I mean, it's really tough to start a business, especially if you don't know. So starting this new business, what were some things that were maybe surprising to you that you had no idea about going into starting a business?
I mean, I still probably call my accountant at least once a month in a actual panic because I don't know what's happening. So the finances is the hardest part, honestly, dealing with the business side of business. But that is, I don't really I'm not like a taxes and numbers kind of gal, so that's always going to be a bit of a learning curve. Blessedly, there are apps for that. And I have an amazing accountant who takes my phone calls all the time and always laughs at me when I call him in a panic, because he's like, it's fine, relax. The easy part of the business is cooking. And then like the medium side is like dealing with clients and stuff. Some clients are more pleasant than others, but after years of being yelled at and having people scream in my face and having to take that in fine dining, I can handle most of my clients, even if they're very persnickety. So I think that my years of training in fine dining, it basically taking abuse, for lack of a better term, actually helped me stay very calm when I deal with clients who are very needy.
So do you kind of have a timeline? Like, where do you see yourself, personal chef versus restaurant? Like, are you trying to keep going with the personal chef thing, get back into cooking at restaurants? Like, how are you balancing that?
So one day at a time, I guess. I found, when I started the LLC, I was like, I'm going to be doing this in this many months and doing this. And you know what? It's like a few months after I started my LLC, I actually ended up getting a job offer in St. John in the Virgin Islands. And I went down there for 3 weeks and it ended up turning into 4 months. So, I've learned that the most I can plan for is probably the month ahead. I know that my goal is to have my own restaurant one day. So when I make major decisions based on my business, they're all going toward that goal. But the minute I start trying to put myself on a timeline is the minute that things are going to go like totally haywire. So I might as well just ride with it, go where it seems, go where it goes, and just do the best I can to kind of keep myself afloat as a business owner. So that, right now it looks very different. I do meal preps, I do dinner parties. I'm also doing pop-ups, which is kind of, the meal preps and the dinner parties are obviously more catered to my clients and their needs. And so I do the pop-ups and stuff to continue to challenge myself as a chef and to find my own voice, because the goal is still to have my own restaurant, not to have my own private, not to be a caterer for the rest of my life. I want to speak my own vision through food. So I'm doing pop-ups and stuff so I can continue to foster and work through that own creative process, while I'm also making money as a private chef.
I guess I have a two-part question related to that. One is, what is your style, your vision? Like, if you could make whatever you want, what would that be? And then to kind of tie it into what you kind of alluded to is like, it sounds like you don't feel like you could cook your food for your clients. And why is that? And do you think you could ever get there? Because this is something that, if you've listened to the podcast, I talk to personal chefs all the time. It's like, I have dishes I want to make, but I have all these clients who just want like crab cakes and filet mignon. And it's like super frustrating. So like finding that balance of like, do you stick to your guns and say, this is what I make, and hope that the customers come to you? Does that all make sense?
Yes, of course it makes sense. And I was listening to one of your podcasts about that. And for those chefs, yeah, I absolutely commend, people who are like, no, I'm making this and this is this, but for me, I'm still starting a business. I'm a young woman living by herself in New York City. I'm not going to like dumb down my food and like make crappy food, but like, if my client wants like, something more simple, then I'll make something more simple for them and I'll make it delicious. Like for me, I still see it as a challenge. Like, okay, so all they want is filet mignon, but like, let me like nail this temp. Let me nail all of these temps. Let me do the filet mignon whole. I love to cook, so I like, even if I'm cooking chicken breast every day, like, I still love to do it. I love to, I just like the action of it. Like I said, it calms my mind very much. So no matter what, as long as my hand's on a knife, I'll probably find a way to throw my own little style on it. So, and that being said, so, I'm very, and like I said, I'm still in a very new business area as well. So I'm not really in a position to turn down a lot of work. I still need to make money. I still need to figure out, what I'm doing. And I also, not even from a financial standpoint, is I need to get my name out there and network, so I need to continue to take jobs so people know who I am and they talk about me to other people. So for all those reasons, I'm more than happy to, do something more on the simple side. And that's why I sought out doing pop-ups, because I knew that would satisfy me also as a chef, is I'm still finding my own voice. So the pop-ups help with that. And they help me push myself as a chef, and they satisfy that creative outlet that I so desperately need as an artist. So for me, I'm able to do both, so I feel quite satisfied in where I'm at.
So then what is that voice? What's your style? What foods are you drawn to?
I'm from New York, and I am a Libra, and so I'm incredibly indecisive. So I love everything. I love all these different types of food. I love one of my favorite foods to eat is mofongo, but I also love foie gras and everything in between. So that's probably part of the difficulty in trying to find my voice as a chef, because I find so much beauty in so many different styles of cooking. But I personally feel like what's resonating with me right now is telling my story through food of my ancestry and my heritage. That's really been coming up a lot for me. I actually am doing a pop-up on February 3rd and 4th with another chef named Lana Lagomarsini, and she and I are doing a like 6 or 7 course tasting menu that's basically telling the story of African migration through the United States and on its way up to New York. And in doing this, we had started talking about this a couple months ago. She's way more versed in African cuisine. She's Ghanaian, but she also used to work at Lana Cooks. So she has, similar training, and we have similar experiences in the kitchen. So we were very quickly kindred spirits. She's much more familiar, though, with this story. She's been doing research on this, for the past year or so. And I just started to dip my toes in. And it was one of those things where, like, you dip your toes in something you think is like a shallow pool, but instead it's like actually like the deepest pool in the world. There's like, as soon as I started to learn a little, I realized how much there is to learn and how much is still unspoken about, especially with African American cuisines and its impact on American cuisine, even today, how the slave trade still impacts American cuisine today. People don't want to talk about it, but it's the truth. There's an old phrase my mom used to tell me is, the harder it is to talk about something, the sooner you need to talk about it. And I think that this is a story that a lot of other chefs of color are trying to tell, and that I am now really, really understanding why this is such a wide and varied story, and my place in it, and what that could mean for me as a chef, and what that could mean for me as a Black woman in America, and a Black woman business owner, and what I want to do for my community. So there's a lot that's been coming up in the research for this pop-up, and I've made the realization that this is probably going to be something I'll be exploring for quite some time. So I think finally I'm like getting a little squeak in my voice, as a chef, after years of trying to find out what it was, working in mostly classically French places, and then working in some Asian cuisine, working in Italian cuisine. I love all these cuisines and techniques, but I think that there's something I could say that's uniquely me. My upbringing, I have all these different cultures and ethnicities mixed in me, and there's a lot of history that I feel like I can speak upon. So I've kind of just been exploring that avenue.
It's exciting. It sounds like, you're kind of at the beginning of your journey to find your voice. And I think most chefs go through that. The first couple of years are just getting the foundational training, being exposed to ingredients and stuff. But when you can really find that thing that kind of lights you up in the kitchen, I think it's amazing. I look forward to seeing, I'm sure, hopefully you'll be posting photos online of all the stuff that you do for this dinner. And
yes, I'm going to start recipe testing this weekend. I'm very excited because it was not as hard as I thought it would be for me to locate a whole pig's head. So that is something I'm really excited to work with. I started reading about this. They make what's called head hash in the Carolinas. And it's basically they take a whole pig's head and just like boil it down and like chop up the meat, mix it with barbecue sauce, and it creates like this like luxurious sauce. And I was like, I want to try to make that.
They're one of my favorite things to cook. I think they're totally underutilized, disrespected, and anytime I can get a whole pig's head and cook it, I love it. Actually, Momofuku, the first cookbook, he does pig's head torchon. I don't know if you've ever seen that technique or whatever. Like, I read that book and just taught myself how to make that dish just by using that cookbook. And it's
impressive.
One of my favorite things to make. Well, Chris Cosentino had done way back in the early days of YouTube like an 8-part video series of how to like bone out a whole pig's head completely whole in like one piece.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, this was like 12 years ago at this point, I think. And I watched that and just kind of practiced in my kitchen at home doing a pig's head. And I don't think my wife loved coming home and seeing this like trash bag with a pig's head in it in the fridge, but got to start somewhere.
Exactly. And that's how you know that you're on the right track for what you want to do with your life too. I mean, if you're deep, like if you're elbow deep in pig space by choice at your home, yeah, you're probably meant to be a chef, you know?
It's one of those weird hobbies. I was going to say habits. It could turn into a habit, but it's one of those weird hobbies, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. Again, that's how it started with me as well. You know, like it was a slow roll, and then all of a sudden my parents had to get another fridge for me because I was pickling everything and they were upset. You know, because the whole house smelled like vinegar. And that was kind of how, you know, things kind of started. That was very much influenced by Gramercy Tavern, and their pickle program it just blew me away. I was like, they are pickling with all these different things I hadn't even thought to pickle with yet. Like, I want to do it.
There's nothing wrong with having a whole dedicated fridge for pickles. I'm pickling shiitakes right now. That's something I just got going before we hopped on here today.
Nice, nice. I love a pickled mushroom. Now my question is, do you hold it in the vinegar or do you take it out and put it in oil?
No, I hold in the vinegar because I'm talking about just like a very quick for an event that's coming up in like a couple days. So it's just going to be a quick, I'm going to pickle it and then it'll be used in like 3 days. So it's not a long-term hold.
Yeah, I have some nice pickled mushroom recipes I could send your way. Also, pickled mushrooms I feel like are like people don't talk about them. They're delicious.
Yeah, well, I'm doing a like a crostini, like a whipped ricotta with herbs and Meyer lemon oil and stuff, and then put some roasted mushrooms on top. But then you need that acid, right? So like,
yes, you do.
find like a shiitake is really good, and pickle. So a little pickled mushroom on top gives it just that little clean bite that you need.
And people are like, what is that? And that's always the best. Even though I do want to own my own restaurant one day, I still want it to be quite interactive with the guests. That's something that, you know, after years of working front of house, like I do enjoy that interaction. Even when I was down in St. John, I was working in a kitchen, but it was a very small restaurant, and my boss needed a pitch hitter for the front of the house just for a couple of days a week. And I went out there and I was like, oh, this is so fun. I forgot about how much fun it is to talk to people. So I still want it to be quite interactive, because one of my favorite things is like seeing when people eat your food and they're like, wow, that's really good. You're like, it's so nice to see how your hard work is. Like people like appreciate it. And it's nice to see that, you know, something I didn't see in every kitchen I've worked in. So yeah, I mean, like I said, when I have my own place, I would love it to be a place where I'm still interacting with people.
That's what I love about the personal chef thing, is because it bridges the gap between front and back of the house. Whereas like, you know, if you're doing an event, you're in their home and you can almost always interact with them. So you see how they enjoy it. I just remember days of like serving food, server takes it out to the dining room, and then, you know, like plates come back and you say, did you enjoy, they enjoy it? And they say, oh yeah, I think so. But it's, you know, like you don't really know, like you didn't have that interaction with the customer. Not all chefs like that. I think that's one of the biggest challenges for people who come exclusively from back of the house into the personal chef thing. Like they don't expect some of those things, or they don't necessarily want to be on show.
No, I get it. And you're absolutely right. You know, lucky for me, I love to be the star of the show. So
one of the other things you're involved in is the Black Chef movement. For people who don't know what that is, can you talk about that for a bit?
Sure. I did some work with them over the summer of 2020. I haven't actually been able to do any volunteer work with them this year, but they definitely helped open my eyes a little bit to the different ways that you can help feed your community, which is also something now that's become very important. But the Black Chef movement started up during the Black Lives Matter revival that happened in 2020. In the wake of everything that happened with George Floyd, they started setting up tables to feed protesters, and it just kind of snowballed. And before I knew it, I was helping them lead events and getting people, you know, fed and having, you know, trying not to have too many tassels with the cops. But I definitely saw some things that are going to be seared in my memory forever, even as a bystander. Had some things said to me by cops, by other fellow New Yorkers, that I never thought I would hear come out of the mouths of, you know, like incredibly racist things that I'm really again, glad I've been exposed to that, because I definitely was under the guise that like everyone in New York was kind of like, all a melting pot. But there's not everyone, and you have to understand we're a melting pot of everything. So it might not even, we're a melting pot of people whose views may not even jive with what you think New York is. So working with them was such a powerful experience, honestly. And it also put in my head, which is like something I'm trying to move forward with as well, that like I want to help my own community. I've lived in Harlem for a while. My family is from here, and I have called, Sugar Hill my home for a while, and I love it here. I love my community. I feel like sometimes it's not fair. I do pop-ups that are, out of the price range of my neighbors and people that I live with and stuff. So I want to try and give back. This next pop-up that I'm doing for Black History Month, some of the proceeds are going to Harlem Grown, which is a nonprofit here in Harlem that actually like is setting up gardens all over Harlem and compost bins, which I actually utilize. So, because New York City composting won't come to my building, even though I've called them like 6 times. So, Harlem Grown is the reason why I'm still able to compost my materials. So they are really important. And also they offer after school programs for children, show them how to grow their vegetables, like just show them, like, when you are watching a vegetable grow, like all of a sudden it's like, it's a different experience. And like, it creates that like love of food at a very young age for the kids in my community. So they're not just eating fast food all the time. And so I think it's really important that we give out, some proceeds. And Nana also has a charity in Philly that she is that some of our proceeds are going to as well. That is near and dear to our heart. That is helping communities out there as well. So it's a lot about it. Working with Black Chef Movement definitely reminded me how important it is. If I'm going to stand on this soapbox and say I'm a Black woman that has a story to tell about her heritage, that I'm also making sure that I'm not just making money for me, but that I'm turning around and giving money back to my community. So I'm good. I'm good on my word. I'm not just utilizing my Blackness for my own benefit. Like I want to utilize it for the benefit of everyone of my community. So I'm doing my best to try and make sure that I can give back, and definitely been looking into doing kind of like delivery type pop-ups that are a lot more affordable, and that'll be focused more in the Harlem area, so that people in my neighborhood can try some of my food, and have it be more of a community effort.
I think it's so hard because a lot of what we do is exclusionary. Like we got into food and cooking because we love feeding people, being creative, nourishing them, and the hospitality. But because of all the costs, the overhead, and everything that comes along with it, I think there's a huge portion of people who usually never get to try our food.
Yeah. And isn't that kind of sad? Because like we definitely got into this industry to feed people, not just one type of people. So I've definitely been trying, like, as the summer comes up and stuff too, I want to do like cookouts more in Harlem, and I just am trying to figure out how to make it make sense for me from a business perspective, while still like, have it make sense for my community, from a financial perspective too, so that's kind of like figuring that out. If I take like a pay cut and I throw a party and a barbecue in Harlem, and I'm at least able to cover my costs and make a little bit of money to live, and everyone's paying cheap prices, I think we can have a little party on the street, and that's what Harlem's about. It's about the community. I know most of the people on my block, when I'm having issues finding a parking spot, they'll tell me where to go. Like, we just kind of all look out for each other. Like, I feel like New York, like this part of New York still feels like that community era, like of New York.
I think chefs are some of the most giving and generous kind of people I know. And I think a lot of that goes back to the hospitality, but I'm just really proud to be in an industry where so many people, I mean, obviously not everyone, but so many people find some way to give back to their community.
I mean, food is, especially coming from like, very, the Black side of my family has been very influential in my life here, because they're all here in New York. Food is something shared around the table, along with your family. And that's where history starts. That's where history is made. That's where history is passed on. So I love hanging out with my family, and food's always a part of the equation when we're all getting together. It's so essential, just the human experience. I really think, I believe that, and I'm very honored to be a part of it, and to do my part to like give people joy. Like that's like the best. Like I'm not very good with telling people that I love them, but I am very good at making them a really good plate of food that'll show them.
What else would you like to share before we get out of here today? Anything on your mind about food world, about the food business?
Basically, what I would love to see in my industry is, as much as I enjoy like the piratey chef culture, I would love to see that kind of take a back seat to a more inclusive culture with chefs. I would love to see more women of color in fine dining kitchens. I would like to see more women of color in executive positions in fine dining kitchens. I would like to see people getting paid a living wage so that restaurants can continue. And as far as where I'm going, I just want to be able to tell the stories of people that we may not even know about, like, Hercules Posey, who was George Washington's cook, an enslaved man who actually ran away on his birthday and came here to New York. He brought so much food into the United States and started creating like this fine dining culture. And then people like Thomas Jefferson's enslaved cook who went to France and ended up becoming like the executive sous chef of like one of the best restaurants there, and then actually like eschewed his freedom to come back into enslavement in the United States to continue to cook for Jefferson. And the reason we like French food so much is because of an enslaved Black man. And I feel like people don't talk about stuff like that enough. We don't really acknowledge that enough. So, Hercules Posey, like he was Washington's slave, as I was saying, but it's widely thought that like a lot of Martha Washington's recipes are actually his, and he doesn't get any credit for that. And it's hard now, hundreds of years later, to kind of go back and get that important information that was so needed back, to just be gotten back then. But that's, obviously because of the way that the world was, people didn't care enough to kind of make the right documentation. But I think that it's really important to go back as far as we can and to talk about our forefounders of food. Like people like bow down to Paul Bocuse, and as they should, because he's an incredible chef and the grandfather of so much here in the United States. But I never heard about Hercules Posey until, like 4 months ago. Why is that?
I've never heard of him at all, so this is all new to me.
Like, and according to like reports of what he was very much like a flamboyant, like kind of person. Like imagine like Django Unchained, but like a chef. And like he was doing fusion food before it was cool. Like it's just, and nobody, and he ended up, like I said, he ended up escaping on George Washington's birthday and coming here to New York. So I've been doing my best to try to find some records of him somewhere, and Thomas Downing was another chef here in New York City that was like known as like the Oyster King. And he was so popular that they ended up when he passed, they shut down Wall Street to memorialize this Black man who had the best oysters in all of New York, because he would go out to the oyster docks in his rowboat to find the best, oysters that he could. And if that's not a chef, I don't know what is, like, and so I feel like if I can just get these names out here, we're doing okay. Netflix came out with the series High on the Hog. I highly recommend that, the series or the book. It's like very easily digestible, for lack of no pun intended, on just the history of Black food systems in America and how much they really truly permeate so much of our culture. Like things like Carolina rice that is so synonymous with the Carolinas. I feel like most people don't realize that the South the landscape in the South wasn't really made for rice paddies. They actually spent somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 billion in money back then, totally terraforming like the South so they could grow rice, because the people that they were enslaving from Africa were rice farmers, and they wanted to make it easier for them. So the 60% of Black Americans can still trace their lineage to someone who came to the port of South Carolina, to the port of Charleston today. I started to do the research for this to try and decide dishes and stuff. And then as I dipped my toes in, I was like, wow, this is, it was like one of those it like came over me. I was like, this is going to take a few years of my life to get through this. And I hope on the other side, I will have a voice, a clear, a very clear vision, but I'm very much called to honor my ancestors and my family and to try and tell their story through my lens as much as I can. So yeah, as much as I want to tell the story of the Black experience, I have to also understand I'm a girl from New York. So, I know of these dishes, but I have to really learn them and learn that culture. And I can't pretend like I'm from the South and I can just talk about it. I have to really kind of talk about it from the perspective that I have with the techniques that I learned in all these classic restaurants. And now and find a way to make those two things make sense in a way that feels genuine. And not like I'm, what's the word? Like taking over anyone's culture or anything like that. I want it to really be my own voice. And by finding my own voice will be very unique, but I have to make sure that it's not anyone else's, or anyone else's perspective.
Well, I think you can still honor the tradition, honor the ingredients, but kind of show it through your lens. I think that's the best way to respect it. I mean, if you didn't grow up eating these dishes, then it's not natural to be recreating them, right? So I think you're going to find your way there, I think, with that.
Yeah, I mean, there are some dishes I did grow up with, like collard greens and yams. My grandmother was from Alabama, so she moved my mother up here when she was 2. So my mother is, essentially from New York City, but we have a lot of family still in the South. So there are some foods that I grew up with and there's others that I didn't. And it's just finding the best way, like you said, to just tell my story through my lens. And I'm trying to do it in a very conscious way.
So for anyone listening who wants to come to your event, this episode should drop right before it. So I don't know if people can still get in, but can you give us a little more info on the event you're going to be doing?
Absolutely. So it's a 6-course tasting menu that we are doing in partnership. So me and Nana have kind of had very long she's actually in Ghana right now. So we've had lots of conversations about how we want to tell this story. But there's a link in my Instagram for the tickets if there are any left. If not, this is, again, I will be, as soon as the event's over, I'll actually put my website link back onto my Instagram page. And that will be the main place to go for events that I'm doing, because this is a story that this will be the first of many, I hope, through my story and what I'm trying to say. So I'm hoping that there will be more opportunities for people to come and enjoy.
Thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it. This is exciting. This should be the kickoff to season 3 of the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. So
woohoo.
Yeah, woohoo. I look forward to
yay, season 3.
Season 3. Look forward to getting it out there. So thanks so much. And it's been great talking to you and having you be a part of the community.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for listening and letting me tell my story. I'm truly, if anything comes across more than anything, I want it to be gratitude. I'm truly so grateful for everything that's happened to me in my life, good and bad. I'm just happy because it's all led to this moment. Every person that's touched my life, every job I've ever had, it all was very much needed to get to where I am now. So I just want that to definitely permeate through everything I say. All the clients I have that, that have helped me fund everything that I'm doing. I'm very, very grateful for the community that I have and the support I've received.
Well, it's definitely great to have people like you in the community. And as we talk about culture shifts, I think we just need to have more people like you in the culinary industry, whether it be personal chef or restaurant, to kind of get it moving in the way that I think it needs to move.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that.
And to all of our listeners, this has been Chris with the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. Go to chefswithoutrestaurants.org to find our Facebook group, mailing list, and chef database. The community's free to join. You'll get gig opportunities, advice on building and growing your business, and you'll never miss an episode of our podcast. Have a great week.